All right. So today we are going to talk about. Usually, I have a three-point agenda every time we do this webinar. This time, I think it's better that we keep it down to 2 points because the second agenda item that we are going to take up, the estimation techniques in Agile, that is going to take a little bit extra time. Um, so we are going to look at a flashcard, which is retrospective. I'll spend a little bit of time there, and then rest of the time we'll discuss the estimation techniques. Estimation techniques is a very big topic in Agile. Even in 35 minutes that I have slotted here, I may not be able to go through everything, but we'll go over high level things in estimation that are there in Agile and the ones that are imported from the practical point of view as well. And then we'll give some time for the Q&A. I also have a few questions as polls that will go through towards the end. Okay, so um, I know we had a little bit of break in between. It's been almost 3 weeks, because of the summer. Um, but we'll continue having these webinars every 2 weeks. Okay, so retrospective. Retrospective is also called retro for short. Sometimes it's also called sprint retro or iteration retro. There are different, terminologies people use in Agile world, but retrospective is the official, Agile terminology, which I think is everybody understands. So retrospective is a meeting which is held at the end of every iteration or sprint, where the group takes turns in answering the following three questions. First question, what is working well and we should continue doing? Second, what is not working and we should stop doing? And third, what we should start doing. Okay, so these are the questions. This is somewhat if you are PMP or studying for PMP, you may think of it more of a lessons learned kind of a thing, but we are doing it at the end of every iteration. Okay, and we are focusing on just these three questions. Okay, and you'll be amazed how much information we are able to gather just by answering these three questions and taking action, retroaction. I'll also show you an example from my project, how a retro result may look like. So again, I'll just go through the definition one more time. I have highlighted the important point in here. It's a meeting which is held at the end of every iteration or sprint. And the group takes turn in answering the following three questions: what is working, what is not working, what we should stop, what we should start doing. Also, another thing to remember: the group here that we are talking about is the is the team. Okay, and team has different, depending on what kind of agile methodology you're using. Your team may consist of um, uh, most of the time it's everybody who is involved in the project. It must be the product owner, the scrum master, or the agile coach, and everybody else that is working in the team. So everybody has to come together, uh, including the product owner and scrum masters. Usually scrum masters are the one who actually host this meeting. Okay, so if you are a project manager aspiring to be an agile coach or scrum master, this is something that you would be responsible for. Usually these meetings, they take, if you're using a scrum methodology, your team size is about 7 plus minus 2. This meeting takes about 90 to 120 minutes, okay, depending on how well or how bad your sprint went. So if you're new to retro, you're scheduling it for the first time, just make sure that you allocate at least 90 minutes for it. I am also going to show you a very quick example of how it may look like. So here's, if you can see my screen, here is an example of a retro that I recently conducted. And what we should start doing, what we should stop doing, and then uh, what we should continue doing. Okay, so these are the three agenda items, and how is also something that you would want to ask. So every time, like you when you're taking turns, and everybody is telling about the good, bad, and what we should start doing things, we should also ask them how they suggest that. Okay, that is also very important, and we take an action item from it. Okay, this is very important. The retro would have no meaning at all if we are not able to take the action item from it. Okay, so retro actions are very, very important. Okay, and you can choose to document as you like it in whichever format you want, as long as you're touching those 3 points. Okay, so coming back to the presentation, so this is about retrospective. um, uh, if you have any questions, you can feel free to write them in the questions box that you have. I will take them up towards the end, all the questions all together. Okay, let's come to the second agenda item which we have today, which is the estimation piece. How do we do estimation? How does Agile guides us to do estimation? So before we actually dive into that, um, the we have to admit that estimation is hard. Okay, it is not easy. It takes time. It takes effort. It takes a lot of focused energy. And I'm talking about complex projects, uh, not just software, but in all domains. And especially for software projects, I believe, and I have immense software engineering experience. Especially for software projects, I think s- estimation is particularly hard. Okay, there are certain techniques that you can use in other domains, but they are not as effective as in software per se. So I'm sure we have all gotten burned because of inaccurate estimates in our careers, the project that we may have taken up. Um, uh, and if you come to think of it, estimation is something that is at the heart of everything. Okay, you plan everything. You plan releases, you plan iterations, you plan the whole customer commitments. You plan against the estimates. Okay, and any inaccuracy there can cause a rippling effect across modules, across different departments, across applications, across different products, and cause serious harm to customer and your business. Okay, so being able to do accurate estimation, it's not a new problem, but it's something that is at the very core of the whole execution part of the project. And Agile is really focused on the execution part of the project. So there are certain things that Agile has provided, but again, just let's look at a few things why the estimation. What are the problem with estimation that we have in a traditional way of thinking? So a few problems that I've listed down here. So we have different techniques. If you're PMP, if you've studied from your experience as well, you can tell there are different techniques that are available. Gut feeling estimate, or we call it analogous estimation technique, or PERT, functional point estimate. There are all these estimation techniques that are available, um, and we have to admit that they they stem from some problem or other, resulting in an inaccurate estimate. Especially we are talking about complex projects here. uh, if we take the bottom up estimation, do we have all the people who can do the estimation at the time of planning? Most probably not. Okay, do we have the right people? Like there'll be people who will be doing the estimation who would not be actually doing that work. Okay, so there's a little bit of there's a significant amount of uh, discrepancy introduced right there. Okay, and then there are problems with how deep you want to go into the analysis before you come out with the most accurate estimate. So there are problems with the techniques that we have traditionally in the project management. Um, do we factor in distractions and interruptions and resource readiness, etc.? Okay, it is very easy to miss these. Okay, I have seen seasoned project managers, team leads, people missing to factor in these simple things. Okay. um, Estimation review, which is uh, another topic that you can ponder on. How many times do we actually go ahead and actually review the estimation as estimates given by, whether it is engineers or whoever is doing the estimation? Estimation review is also, a problem in practical project execution. And then continuous improvement, like, do we match, what we estimated versus how much time it actually took, and why it took extra time or lesser time than what we had, why there was a discrepancy, and how much was the discrepancy. So, and once we are able to do objectively analyze that, there's there is we have to find a way to improve our estimates next time, not make the same mistake again. Okay, so we don't really do this continuous improvement, in the estimation itself. So, um, now we know what the problems with estimation traditionally are. Let's look at what um, Agile has to provide. Okay. So, there are a few other things that are there in Agile, and if you looked at the content outline of PMI's ACP certification, there may be a few other things, but I'm going to stay focused on these. Yeah, the list of items that I have listed here. So there are story points, which we are going to talk about in detail um, right away. Uh, there's affinity estimation technique, there's planning poker, and there's wideband Delphi. So we're going to talk about all these four things in the next uh, 20, 25 minutes or so. Okay, let me see if I think there's a question. Okay, no question. So coming back to the presentation. Okay, so we have, let's talk about story points. Um, Story points have, so let's talk about what story points are right now. Um, Traditionally, we are used to doing, if somebody asks you an estimate, you give an estimate with some units. Okay, so it is going to take 1 day. It's going to take 2 days, or it's going to take 5 hours. Okay, so this is what we are traditionally used to doing estimation with. Story points, they do relative estimation. Okay, or they try to assess a relative size. Okay, and studies have shown um, that relative size is always more accurate than an actual absolute size. You can think of it in a way that, if you're looking at a home and you want to tell, the size of a master bedroom versus size of the living room, you can, if you're giving a relative size, you can say that, the living room is twice as big as the master bedroom. Okay, and that is going to be always more accurate than you trying to think of the absolute size of the living room and the absolute size of the master bedroom. Okay, not only that, it will take you time to measure that. Okay, so relative sizing is always more accurate than absolute. Okay, so which is the strength of story points? Okay, so how, we'll look at how, how we give the numbers. uh, But when we are doing estimation, one of the things that uh, agile techniques suggest is that we factor in everything. Okay, there are certain things that we are not used to factoring in. Like there may be test cases review. I know we factor in time for writing test cases, we factor in time for executing test cases, but we don't always factor in time for test case review. We factor in time for doing integration testing of the of the deliverable produced, but we may not factor in time for unit test case writing. There are a, a, a whole big list of things that we usually don't factor in. Code coverage, how much code coverage was there, that analysis. There are things like that that we usually don't factor in. Communication, there could be a serious coordination or communication that may be needed between product owner and the team and the QA engineers and the agile coach. So there could be third party communication that may be needed, which you may not have any control over. Okay, so there are those kind of things that we want to factor in when we are doing those estimates. Okay. One of the techniques, and very cool techniques, and I've been using it for years, is it's kind of standard now across industries when we're using story points, is we use a Fibonacci series to do the estimation. Now, what does it mean? Okay, so we know the Fibonacci is the series in which the next number is the sum of the preceding two numbers. Okay, so it goes like 1, 2, 3, and 5, and 8, 13, like that. Okay, now what is the significance of this in story points? When we are estimating, so we are trying to give story points, which are unitless. We're trying to give story points to every story. Okay, so user stories, we've talked about it a few times already in past few webinars. So you have a story and you're trying to estimate, you do some analysis. Instead of trying to come out with an absolute days analysis, you come out with a story point number. Okay, and if you think that, you know, so these are all relative. So 2 is obviously greater than 1, 3 is greater than 2. If you think that a story point, if you think a story is bigger than 3 story points, instead of making it 4 story points, you make it 5. And if you think the story is a little bit bigger than 5 story points, instead of making it 6 or 7, you make it 8. Okay, and there's a reason why it works very, very well. And the reason is that usually, when the quantum of work increases, there's more complexity that is getting induced in it. There's more coordination needed, there'll be more effort needed in driving clarity. There'll be more communication points. There'll be uh, th- there could be misinterpretations of communication. Uh, there could be unforeseen things that may happen, which would consume time. Okay, so by using Fibonacci series, you can quickly factor that in easily. Also, one more thing which I have not noted down here on the slide is that we have, after 8, so it goes like, 5, 8, 13, and instead of instead of making 21 after 13, we just do 20, 40, and 100. Okay, because anything that grows beyond 13 story points is considered, a large effort or a very large effort, and it can become inaccurate just, because of its sheer volume. So if there's a story, I think a few webinars ago somebody asked a question, a very good question, that, how do you know, when your story has a very high estimate, or is your story small enough? So it goes back to the story, the nature of the story. And my suggestion to everybody who's listening is that, if you have a story whose estimate is coming to be more than 13 story points, means that either you have not written that story following the invest principle of the story, which we have talked about as well, that, it is not small enough, um, or you are missing something in your estimate itself, like you have factored in something that may not be needed. So however, it is not unusual that, there would be stories in your backlog that would have, story points ranging over 13. um, but every time you find a story which has story points more than 13, it is a good time to go back to the story, review it with the product owner, review it with the team if required, and make sure that you are doing it the right way. You are doing it the right agile way. So Fibonacci series is, something that is very cool, and it has never failed me. And I strongly recommend that anybody who's new to Agile, who's trying to use story points, they should start using Fibonacci series. Um, Point number 4 here that you see, at some point in time, you will have to do a translation of the story points to some, more tangible, absolute figures. Okay. And the reason you'll have to do it is because if you're using, I know we haven't talked about the burn up and burn down charts yet. They are coming in the next few webinars. Very cool information radiators. We'll be talking about them. But when you're using burn down, there is you have to specify the remaining time in your story. Okay, so as you're working on a story, you're logging time. We looked at uh, the tempo as a tool. So when you're logging time in tempo, it is subtracting that time from the story and adjusting the remaining time. Okay, so that remaining time has to be a tangible absolute figure. Okay, even though you're doing estimation for based on unitless story points, the remaining time of a story, you would need it, the tool, and any tool that is trying to plot the burn down would need an absolute time. So the translation, you can use this kind of translation. I mean, it's this is what kind of used by most of the agile teams. But again, I mean, this is your own definition, depending on what kind of work you're doing, what kind of stories you have, what are the, how big or small stories you have. So the translation can be, one story point is something that takes less than 9 hours. Okay, so usually people they get confused with the story points which have low number or high number. So for low number, one story point means that it is simple, it can be done quickly, it's easy. Even if it is a 1 hour effort, 1 or 2 hour effort, you should give it one story point. Okay, there's no point five story points or any fraction. Just give it one story point, even though your translation may say that it is 9 hours or less than 9 hours. Okay, then story point two is double the size of one. Okay, it can range from 10 to 20 hours. Story point three is triple the size of one. It can take anything between 3 to 4 days. Story point five, is 5 times one or a little over 2 times two. So 5 to 7 days, and so on and so forth. Okay. And you can see as you reach 13 or more, the effort involved is getting larger. Okay. And as the effort gets larger, your uh, your risk increases. Okay, your inaccuracy increases. Okay, which is why the risk increases. Okay, so my recommendation every time I see a story with a high story point is that you I think you can break the story down into smaller stories. Okay, it is like 9 out of 10 times I have come across a situation where I've seen higher story point estimate to it, 13 or 20 or 40 like that, and we have been successfully able to break that story down into smaller stories which conform much closely to the invest principle. Okay, so the translations are also important. Okay, but when you're doing estimation and story points, you're not trying to put any units next to them, you're just doing numbers. Okay, and hopefully Fibonacci series numbers. And the last point I'll say, and definitely not the least here, okay, the whole reason we are doing the story point business is because we want to come out with a velocity. I know velocity I haven't taken up in detail yet, but simply saying that velocity is the the effort that a team is able to output in a particular sprint or an iteration. Okay, and if you're tracking your effort in story points, you are tracking your velocity in story points. Okay, like the team that I'm working with right now, there are about 7 to 9 people in it, and I know my velocity is 35 story points. Okay, I have looked at the past uh, trend of past 6 or 7 iteration, and for the next iteration I can confidently go and tell my product owner that you know our team's velocity is 35. Anything more than 35 story points, we will not be able to commit to this iteration. Okay, and of course, sometimes you have to factor in vacation time and time off, and if there are new members in the team, so there's velocity also can be a complex dimension, where how you would do a forecast based on all the variables that are there. Okay, but the fact of the matter here is, because you're tracking your velocity in terms of story points being unitless and relative, it is more and more accurate than trying to identify an velocity in terms of days. So you can imagine, if you try to calculate your velocity in terms of days, it would be very risky to do commitment story commitment based on that, because your velocity would come out to be maybe 250 days, depending on how big your size, how what is the size of your team and how long your sprints are. So story points, they help overall, they make your estimates more accurate. And while you're doing story point estimate, make sure you factor in all the things that can contribute towards the effort, whether it is unit tests, whether it is code coverage, whether it is communication, external communication, internal communication. Just make sure that you factor in all that. Okay, so before I go any further, I would like to take any questions if there are any. Let's see. So the question is, why not save the time, effort, eliminate the translation step by estimating the hours and not relative size? Okay, good question. So there are problems with that. The first problem is that you don't need the remaining um, remaining time when you're doing the estimate, when you're putting the first estimate. Okay, that is first most significant reason. The second reason is, you can see that the translations here, they are not hard translations, they are telling you a range. Okay, so story point one is, it's 1 to 9 hours of effort. Okay, so there's a range in every story point, it is not a hard number next to each one. So it gives you, now you can argue that the remaining time may not be accurate either, which is true. You there are but the beauty of agile is that as you're going within the iteration, and as you're logging work against the story, every day you know how much time is remaining. Okay, that remaining time you're tracking against an absolute unit. Okay, so as you continue working on a story, your remaining time starts reducing, and if you keep a close tab on it using one of the tools, burn down charts, or any other custom tool that you may want, you can keep a very close tab on whether that remaining time is accurate or not, even from the relative terms. So the relative sizing we are using at the very beginning, where you're trying to give an accurate estimate, where you're trying to give the most accurate estimate at the beginning, and as you're going through the iteration, as you're working on the story, the remaining time, you are using the absolute. I hope that answers that question. Doesn't estimate also depend on size of your team? No. So logically speaking, the an estimate is an estimate on how long it's going to take. Uh, how much effort you're going to put in, whether it is 1 day of effort, 2 day of effort, 3 day of effort. You are not trying to estimate the calendar time that it is going to take, or how many resources are going to work on it. when you are creating an estimate, you it is just a plain vanilla estimate. It should not be related with, it should not be associated with how many people are going to work on it. Okay. Okay, so follow-up question on that. So is this estimate for one person working on this story? No, the estimate is uh, the the estimate is the total estimate. You can have stories on which there may be more than one developer working, more than one QA engineer is working. It is possible, but that is how you are going to resource the work on that story. Okay, but the overall estimate for the story is going to be is is going is not dependent on the number of resources working on it. Okay, you can have, if you're trying to construct a bridge, you can construct that bridge by putting in more resources in 1 month versus 6 months by putting in less resources. But if you come to think of it, the cumulated uh, effort that has gone into it is probably the same. Okay, duration may be, you may have been able to finish the project early. Okay, so hopefully that answers that question. Okay, Fibonacci series. Okay, so I'll just quickly explain what the Fibonacci series is again. Um, So Fibonacci is just a series of numbers. Okay, so it starts with 1, 2, 3, and 5 is the sum of 2 and 3, which are the preceding numbers. 8 is the sum of 5 and 3, the two preceding numbers. So this is the Fibonacci series. How we use it is, if if you think that a story is a little bigger than 5 story points, because you're doing relative estimate, so you have a reference story, I believe. Um, and if you think that your estimate of this story that you're estimating is a little bit over 5 compared to your reference story, instead of making it 6, you just jump the estimate to 8. Okay, so if it is a little bit over 8, jump it to 13. Okay, so that's that's the technique, that's the Fibonacci technique of using story points. Okay, another question. Is the estimate for the entire work required to complete the story? Yes, that is correct. Story point is the estimate to, effort required to complete the whole story. It is not related to the resources. Okay. All right, let's move on. If you have more questions, just feel free to write it in the questions box. I'll come back to it. Okay. Now there are other, how do you, there are certain other techniques also that we can use. Uh, you know, Affinity estimation does not use story points. Um, I have seen a lot of teams, like if you have a smaller team, or if you have stories that are small enough, you can just decide to have 3 buckets, like small, medium, and large. You can choose to have 3 buckets, or sometimes teams use five buckets. Uh, but it's more common to use 3 buckets when using affinity estimation. Um, and you can just put your story in those buckets. Okay, whether your story is small, medium, or large. Okay, and then you know it's particularly popular with the teams who want to do estimation a little more analogously. in the sense that they know that they can take up one large story and two medium stories in a sprint. So if your teams are small, your stories are small, instead of using story points, you may be better off using affinity estimation. Okay. There are teams which use 5 levels of affinity estimation too: extra small, small, medium, large, extra large. But I always encourage them to use story points, because you can use the same 5 levels with the story points, and it's kind of a normalized data for you. So you can use 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, you know those 5 numbers as your standard story point uh, buckets, and use them. So um, one of the places where I have found this affinity estimation very useful is when you have epics. So if you choose to organize your stories under epics, uh, it's possible that you want to have some sense of estimates against the epics, even though they are far out in the future release. Okay, so instead of trying to do the most accurate estimate based on the story points, you can always just put them in 3 or 4 buckets. Okay, small, medium, large, or small, medium, extra large, like that. So it's useful right now in the project that I'm working on. We use a combination of both. So we use story points for normal stories, and we use affinity estimation for the epics. Okay, so again, because it is relative, it is always more accurate than trying to put days or hours against every story. Okay, planning poker. um, those of you who are familiar with somewhat familiar with agile, you may have heard this term already. It is a very interesting way of arriving at uh, a very accurate, very very accurate estimate for a particular story. The way it works is, there are if everybody in the team, or the estimators in the team. Like, for example, I have a team of 7 members right now. I do not always involve everyone in estimations. I involve maybe 3 or 4 people, but for you know you can identify some of the people who want to participate in estimation process, and use planning poker as one of the techniques to reach a very very accurate and very refined estimate for any story. Okay. There are many other advantages of playing planning poker, which I'll tell you as I go along. So I want to demonstrate this with use of this example. Let's say we have these many estimators. Okay, it is a very inflated example. Usually you don't have so many estimators. um, Ranges from anywhere from 3 to 5 in a well-formed agile team. So, but let's say for this example's sake that you have all these estimators. There are all these planning poker cards that you see at the bottom here, bottom right. So these are the cards that are actually available in the market. So if you search for planning poker cards, you'll find a lot of hits. Um, they are actual cards, and everybody who's the estimator will have their own deck of cards, which will range from 1, 2, 3, 8, 13, 20, 40, and 100. You can see from 1 through 13, again, we have the Fibonacci. Okay, so it is pretty much a standard technique, the Fibonacci. And after 13, it's kind of, a rounded figure, 20, 40, and 100. Okay, so the way the game is played is that you pick up a story, and everybody, you know, looks at the story, understands the story description, and uh, takes out the the estimated card for that story, which they think. Okay, so let's say they're playing round one, and David pulled out one whereas Andre pulled out 13. Okay, and everybody else pulled out something in between. Okay, now at this point, you can see that there's a big spectrum of estimates for this one single story. At this point, David and Andre will have to communicate with each other to understand why they thought what their estimate was and why there was such a big disparity between the two estimates. And everybody else is listening or contributes to the discussion. Okay, so very interactive communicative way of proceeding with the rounds. Okay, so after the end of first round, the story, because of the communication, will have more clarity, which will, everybody will be more educated about the story. Maybe Andre is a subject matter expert and he can foresee the nuances that that story may have to encounter, whereas David cannot. Okay, but in the process of communication, they would come across, they would all be educated. Okay, so it is a great planning poker is a very good way of knowledge sharing within the team as well. Very good way. And also in the process, not only you are estimating, but you are also driving clarity as a group. Okay, so what will happen is after that discussion, they'll continue to play round two. Let's say they play round two, and now you can see suddenly David has acquired more knowledge, and his estimate the second time around is 8. Okay, and you can see that there's a little bit of fluctuation in others' estimates as well because they've been doing some discussion. Um, Similarly, after round two, again there'll be more discussion, and they'll continue to play with round three. Okay, until everybody agrees to the fact that the actual estimate of that story is 8. Okay, usually in my experience, it never goes up to round three. Okay, usually round one and round two, they are sufficient enough to come out with a uh, with a consensual figure. Also, if it is taking more than 3 rounds, again, it's a trigger for you that there's something wrong with the story itself. Okay, assuming that everybody in the group is educated, understands, and a good team member, and they understand the context. So if it is taking more than 3 rounds, then there may be a problem with the way story is written itself. Okay, so that's about planning poker. There is one more technique that I'll touch upon, Wideband Delphi, and it is not, obviously, I mean, it's been there for a very long time. Those of you who have done PMP, you may have already read about Delphi estimation. So it is the same technique, works on consensus, but more importantly, it is based on anonymity. So there may be a coordinator, or or Scrum Master, or the Agile coach can be the coordinator, and they would request everybody who's the estimator or everybody in the team to give him or her their best story point estimate anonymously, so nobody knows what the other person have estimated. This works well for the team where members don't like to get influenced by others estimate, and it works pretty well, that because of the fact that the influence level on the other person's estimate goes down. Works very well for distributed teams. um, However, that is changing very quickly because we have these planning poker cards that are available like virtual cards online, where you have a virtual deck of those cards, and you can uh, play it synchronously, okay, if you're not all co-located. But for distributed team where there is a huge time difference, it becomes difficult to play planning poker. Okay, so in that case, Wideband Delphi has proven very effective. Okay, so I'm gonna stop here with the estimation. Um, Obviously there are certain topics like story points itself and planning poker. There are certain subjects where we can go much deeper into, but because I want to limit the scope for these webinars, and it's more like a overview of the agile things. If there are any questions on these topics that we covered today, so we started with retro and estimation, story points, uh, affinity estimation, planning poker, and wideband Delphi. If there are any questions, I'll take them now. I see a few of them have come up already. How do we track delays or slippage in the sprint? Okay, good question. So uh, the way we track is, if we are using agile tools like burn down chart, okay, instead of tracking slippage, what we are trying to do is we are trying to make sure that we have the most accurate estimate or remaining time of a story at any time. Okay, if there is a slippage, you would know it very quickly by looking at the burn down chart itself, like a certain that your burn down would uh, you know uh, would there be a difference between the reference burn down and the actual burn down. Okay, so as a scrum master, you'll be able to see that very quickly. um, Tracking slippage is, virtually you're trying to track that. you know uh, I think what you're looking at is that, if there is a certain story that was supposed to be done by a certain date, but it is not done by that certain date, or it is at risk of being finished at that certain date. So what you're looking for is, is if there's a story that is at risk right now. Okay, and the burn down chart, if you are if you have the remaining time of every story correctly, to the most accurate figure, you would be able to track it very quickly. Okay. Do we have anything bigger than 100? No. And like I was saying, that there is, if there's anything going over 13 itself, that as from my experience, I would relook at the story to to find out why that story is so big to begin with. Okay, so having anything as big as even 40 or 100 is very unusual, and something that a scrum master or the team should relook at. Which technique is more popular? uh, they are all popular. I would say one thing, that story points, it start using story points, even if you're not playing planning poker, even if you're not doing affinity estimation, even if you're not doing wideband Delphi. But if start using story points. At first it becomes there's a little bit of transition phase, where you would try, where things may not uh, come very naturally to you. But after one or two iterations, everybody in the team would get very used to it. Okay, so my favorite is planning poker, especially now that there are virtual cards that are available. So I'm a big fan of group decision making effort. I like planning poker a lot. And if you have a team of very good engineers and very good estimators, I would strongly recommend that you use planning poker. But it's hard to choose one over the other, because every technique may have more benefits in a certain situation. Uh, Retrospective. I'll come back to retrospective in a little bit. Stories can be put in different buckets based on story size. How do you know the size by just reading the story? Do you have to be an SME? Good question. So the, all this is assuming that the person who's doing the estimate is actually qualified to do the estimate. If I am working in module A, and I'm asked to estimate a story from module B, obviously I'm not qualified to do that estimate. So, to answer your question, yes, you have to be an SME. However, you don't have to be an expert. SME has is kind of a loose term used to these days. But if I'm doing an estimate for a particular story, I have to understand the context. I have to understand, uh, you know, the basic idea behind that story, what is being tried to implement, and I understand the framework where it is going to be put in. Okay. Do we have access to past slides? Yes, we do. There are video recordings of this whole presentation on YouTube. You will not have access to the slide deck itself, but it is going to be a recording you can play back. Okay, another question. Our team is distributed and we use Fibonacci to estimate story points. Everybody sends his numbers via Office Communicator. Does this mean we use both techniques, Fibonacci and planning poker? Yes. So Fibonacci is, you would probably always use a combination of these techniques. Okay, so first of all, you're using story points, which is one technique. The other is that you're using Fibonacci, so, what, and if you're using planning poker cards themselves are always, built on Fibonacci. Okay, so like what I was showing you, I can go back to that slide. So planning poker cards are 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, 20, 40, and 100. Okay, so you are using a combination, which is a very good thing. Okay. Just before we adjourn, I think we'll just do a very quick poll based on what we have learned today, so that I'm able to keep you engaged. So I'm going to ask one question here first. Please go ahead and use. Okay, poll is launched. Go ahead and answer.